You guys made a roster change in the AD carry role, but everything else is still the same, right? But tell me, what does Pr0lly bring to the table, to the team, that maybe Forgiven couldn't?
Well, I've always coached like a really team-based style of game, so it really includes all 5 players kind of unified and giving up kind of their own personal ego for the benefit of the rest. And when I spoke to Pr0lly, the first few things that came out of his mouth were very team-oriented and focused around more like cerebral type plays as opposed to mechanical outplays. And after playing a split with a really, purely mechanical player, I think it's a lot more beneficial for the style that I coach and the style the players have to bring in a lot more like team-based, like macro style AD carry that's really more focused around like rotating and kind of taking map objectives that way.
Like, we had a few interviews where you just said, everyone's like regarding you as a coach, that no matter how many players you change in the team, you still have the same style, right? Like the old H2K, when Kasing was still on the roster, kind of had this very team-oriented style, and then you brought in like Junkers and Wanda and the new guys, and you still seem to play like the same style, right? So is it a lot easier to just plug in and play like with Pr0lly, or what does actually change in like in-game wise right now?
It was easy to change the player. The thing was, there's a lot of new things that we could try now with Pr0lly. So the team, we spent the last week and a half kind of experimenting with different things that we weren't able to do with our last roster. So it was easy in that sense that it really didn't change much in our macro game. A few things were lost and forgotten due to our nice EU vacation during off-season, but it's pretty easy to plug and play players when at least there's a strong basis with the shot callers. The players outside of that kind of just have to understand and follow, and then they have to be able to kind of like highlight what the shot callers are good at already.
Yeah. So to come back to the last split, what is your biggest takeaway from the last split, or maybe playoffs?
I think last split I tried too many things at once as opposed to kind of focusing on certain things. So this split I kind of I kind of narrowed down the way I did coaching and the roles for the players. Before, I kind of approached it with everyone can do everything at all the time, and it just ended up being a team with not that many extreme strengths. So now we're kind of focusing on putting players in good situations that they already excel at, and then pushing them so now they're going to be above average or excellent at what they're doing.
You guys always seem to have like a really good and strong regular season, right? But in the playoffs, it kind of falls off. Like, it feels like the team performance is like suffering. You guys are not performing to the standard you are playing in the regular season. Do you know, like, can you tell me why that is maybe? Or is it just like a mental thing maybe from the players? It's like the problem there, weakness maybe?
It could be a weakness. I think a lot of it is the regular season is just vastly different than playoffs. So regardless of how well you do regular season, it doesn't really have too much implication. There's always a big patch that comes before playoffs, and then best of fives are so different than best of ones. So now that we're going to go to a best of 2 format, I think it'll be really good for the players and for me to kind of get this kind of more endurance factor in the game. And then this should kind of catapult us into playoffs, so we'll have all our bases covered this time. Okay,
so about the off-season, it was a pretty crazy off-season in Europe. I mean, every single team changed players. And who do you think is like the team that benefited the most out of it? Or maybe what teams did you think maybe that got like weakened? Like, for example, maybe Origin, Bora returning back to Fnatic, OG picking up OG's bot lane, G2 rather.
Well, I think, yeah, Origin and G2 both were the most affected, I think. The strongest bot lane in Europe moving to another team is a huge one, so a big disadvantage to Origin, and I would say a big advantage to G2, as long as Mithy's able to kind of plug and play with Trick style and how Kiki's plays. So I would say G2 probably has the most benefit out of players. And Origin, I think, played off their bot lane and Mithy shot calling so much. So if Hybrid's able to fill those shoes, that will soften the blow. But other than that, the other teams kind of, in my opinion, made kind of like side grades. There weren't too many big upgrades. But other than G2, I think we made a really big roster change for the better. So I would say, yeah, it's probably G2 and then us, and then everyone else kind of fits in the middle.
If you switch a bot lane like this from a kind of low economy bot lane to like a high economy bot lane like Sven and Niels, how much does the dynamic actually suffer from the team? Is it like a pretty big change, even though it's an upgrade on paper?
It's not a big change if the players are receptive to it. I know certain top laners that are very, gold hungry and they really need a lot of jungler attention. So that'll probably be a big problem for teams like that because top lane, at least for example, if you're a player who can't play for yourself, then once you have to start playing the game like 1v2, it gets really, really difficult. And some mid laners aren't really comfortable playing from behind or getting shoved to turret. So as long as you have like flexible players, it's not really a big issue to kind of change that. It's more about the shot callers understanding the most efficient play for that style, not necessarily the most efficient play for macro game or what's going to be better on the whole, but more of what's going to go with that style of having this high economy bot lane like that.
We had a pretty big mid-season change.
Yeah.
We have a ton of new majors doing cool stuff. We have new dragons, 4 of them, I think, or 5. What's your take on all of that? Like, is it healthy for the overall gameplay? I mean, not only the competitive side of it, but maybe even like the viewer aspect, like from an observer point?
The mage changes might be harder for viewers. I felt like they kind of added a level of complication with the new items. The proto belt, for example, that's going to be really hard for people to kind of understand unless they actually play the game enough. And the mage updates didn't change too much. There's a few that have been fluctuating, like the Malzahar jungle, but that's obviously out. I think overall, like the AP changes were really good. I like the new items. They're not seen very much in scrims or anything like that. So I think other than mage champions changing slightly, the dragons were a big change, which I'm not really a fan of. I think the RNG aspect is really bad for the game. I kind of held onto my opinion before I saw it in scrims, but now after playing a week and a half with it, it's just really destructive. A team that's ahead can either snowball or get stopped by a dragon, and a team behind is either praying for that bad dragon spawn or unlucky by getting an infernal drake for the enemy team. So it's nice that dragon becomes a priority to fight over. But the fact that the power levels of the drakes are so big, it just makes the game kind of, you either must take this or you must leave this kind of drake.
So of course, dragon being a really important objective, how does it affect lane swaps? Like lane swaps are still a thing, or it got a lot harder because jungler doesn't really share experience in it anymore, and then the towers got a bit changed in that regard, and then how does it affect bot lane maybe? Like, do we see some teams running a very bot lane centric style? Because right now, everyone knows that Lucian is like the go-to AD carry that dominates the lane. Does it like really affect how you play the map so much that we might not even see 1 or 2s anymore?
1v2s will definitely be there. I think in the beginning of the split, most games are going to be standard because the teams aren't innovative enough to figure out the lane swap. So we're going to see a lot of teams that are just waiting for other teams to perform it so they can copy it. I think the lane swap meta is still completely fine. I think it's very, very similar to the last one. There's some minor changes and a little bit of direction with, the jungler not being able to share XP and, the towers hitting harder. But overall, there's always going to be a strategic aspect of dodging lane bullies in the bot lane. So that's always going to be there. I think it'll probably take 2 or 3 weeks for teams to kind of man up and learn the strategy and pull off the lane swap. But for the first couple of weeks of LCS, I would guess it's going to be lane stompers, bot lane, and it's just going to be standard lanes.
All right, thank you. We did it.